dealer is not interested in art. He's interested in, well, basically in money, but, you know, a work of art is as good or bad as the price it fetches. The art historian is not really very interested in art. I mean, he studies it, but he's much more interested in his career, whether he's going to go up in the, you know, whether he's going to become the head of some great museum. Or this is what he's really interested in. And whether he can get a knighthood because he knows a lot about Rembrandt, you know. But no one would have ever given Rembrandt a knighthood for being Rembrandt. You know, it's all false values. And art is neglected. Nobody is studying it, really and truly, with the kind of honesty that is necessary. And although I can't myself claim to be a very honest man, in fact, many people think I'm an old crook, I do feel that in this case, at least, that I am honest. I mean, I do try to understand something about art.
The medieval hilltop village of Anticoli Corrado, to the east of Rome, has for centuries been home to painters and sculptors. 25 years ago, English artist Eric Hebborn came to live here.
How I shall freeze after all this sun. Here I am a gentleman, at home a parasite. I love England, I love London, and I love my English friends. But when I'm in the piazza here with the old boys, you know, I feel that we're made of the same stuff. You know? And they're not going to say, oh, you're a working class guy. And I'm not going to say to them, you're a peasant. We get on, we have our glass of wine together. I'm very happy about it. I think I would have been happier as an artist in the Renaissance and in the 20th century, because I would have liked to have been employed in a different way rather than sort of, you know, having to be on the fringes of society, as it were, and being a little bit shady and all that.
Hebborn has devoted much of his life to the study of the Renaissance artists, and in particular the drawings made by the old masters as preparatory sketches for their oil paintings.
But I think what particularly appeals to people who are interested in old master drawings is that they are a spontaneous expression of the artists. Obviously, drawings vary a great deal in whether they were made just sitting down, doodling on a piece of paper, or a rather elaborate finished drawing made, say, as a cartoon for a painting. But you do get a much more personal feel, I think, from a drawing. How the artist, I mean, it's just, I mean, often it's starting with Leonardo, artists were really kind of thinking on paper.
I've made drawings in the Dutch style, in the Flemish style, in the German style, in the Swiss style, in the Italian style. And I've even deigned to do a few English drawings and some French drawings. And I've normally chosen important masters, not necessarily the greatest, because it's very hard to convince people nowadays when you turn up with a Rembrandt or a Michelangelo or Leonardo. They say, oh, let's go and tell somebody else, you know. But nevertheless, I've turned up with people like Stefano della Bella and Castiglione and 17th century masters of some importance, including Rubens and Van Dyck. So I have done some very, very important artists. And I wouldn't call Gainsborough a minor artist, nor would I call Constable a minor artist. And all of these people I've done, as it were.
Hebborn claims to have made over 1,000 drawings in the style of scores of different artists from the 14th to the 20th century. Many of these drawings are now in the possession of some of the greatest private and national collections around the world, from the British Museum to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York.
I'm not a crook. I'm just doing what people have always done during the history of the world. I mean, ever since art was invented, people have made imitations of it, shall we say. And I believe that the real criminal, if there is one, is the person who makes the false description. I mean, if I were to tell you this statue here is by Praxiteles, or whoever it's been copied from, I would be making a false description. Even if I said it was Roman, I would be making a false description because it's a modern copy. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't enjoy it. I mean, you can enjoy it. The fake isn't necessarily bad as a work of art. It is simply something that's wrongly described, and age sometimes gives dignity to imitations, providing they're of some quality. And they should be enjoyed for what they are, rather than being questioned for what they're not.
The sale of several drawings in the style of Augustus John to a specialist dealer in London helped finance Hebborn's permanent move to Italy in the summer of 1964. For the next decade, business was brisk on the top floor of an old palazzo in the heart of Rome's antique district, a conveniently short walk from the Christie's sale room in Piazza Navona. For a Christie's sale in Rome in 1974, Hebborn supplied 24 drawings in the style of various old masters. These were attributed by Christie's to 16th century artists such as Stefano della Bella, Luca Cambiaso and Fra Bartolomeo. As a self-styled dealer in old master drawings, Hebborn was able to offer his own efforts alongside perfectly genuine examples. He called this bread and butter business Panini Galleries and quickly re-established links with the London art trade.
It was fairly soon after I went to Carnegie's when a drawing was sent from Italy, from some galleries called Panini Galleries, by Jan Bruegel, either the older or younger, which had been in Carnegie's in the 1930s. It could be traced in the stock book, and I think it may even been exhibited. I really can't remember this date. And this seemed to us a perfectly genuine, nice drawing, which the firm was very pleased to purchase back. And as a result, I think I was going to Italy fairly shortly afterwards. I thought I might call on Eric Hebborn, who lived at that time in Rome.
I bought a drawing in a sale, not in one of the great sale rooms such as Christie's and Sotheby's. And I noticed on the back of it a label, the label of a dealer called Carnegie. And I thought, well, you know, if they had it, it's probably a decent drawing. And I took it home, and it said that it was by Bruegel. So I hung it on the wall, and I was very proud I'd bought a Bruegel for only £40. I thought, how the hell did I get it that cheap if it's a real Bruegel? Anyway, I was there for a few months. And then I began to look at it, and I thought, you know, this is not a Bruegel. This is a copy. And I thought it was an engraver's copy, because in the old days, the only way of reproducing drawings was, you know, for the engraver to make an engraving of it and reproduce it. So to make his engraving, he first made a copy in the medium that the artist had used. I thought, well, that's what it is. It's an engraver's copy. Then I wondered to myself, well, why can't I copy this copy, and make it a little better, and then it'll be a little bit more like a Bruegel. And so I set to work in that way, and I made a copy, a very close copy, I mean, almost exact copy, but I speeded up the lines. That is, I gave it more vigorous movement. And it did look a bit more like a Bruegel to me when I'd finished. And then I did something I rather regret doing now. I tore up the thing I'd copied, the thing that'd been in the Carnegie frame, and I flushed it down the lavatory. And I rather wish I hadn't, because it would be nice now to compare, you know, perhaps time, you know, perhaps I destroyed an original Bruegel. I hope not, and it seems that the people in the Metropolitan Museum think the same thing. I mean, they seem to be happy with my copy.
I have talked very recently, in the last day or two, to the Metropolitan Museum, who naturally have subjected it to very close tests, such as tests can be made. And they say the paper is perfectly genuine, the ink looks perfectly good for a drawing of that date. And though, naturally, they're keeping an open mind about it, they can see absolutely nothing wrong with the drawing.
I don't have to prove whether I did it or not. If they can't see it, what kind of damned experts are they? I mean, they should be able to say, this is definitely by Bruegel. But then you ask them, they say, yes, this is definitely by Bruegel. Then you say to them, is it by Jan Bruegel, the elder or the younger? well, we're not quite sure about that. Professor so-and-so says it's the younger. Professor so-and-so says it's the elder. But, you know, it could be a very late follower. And that's my claim.
There are one or two tests you can do for ink, but that does presuppose there have to be certain substances in the ink which were not known at that particular time. But for the most part, it would not help. And anyway, in order to do these tests, you pretty well have to ruin the drawing, so that at the end of the day, you're not very much better off.
I've just been in the forest, if we can call my little wood a forest, collecting oak galls. And these I need for making oak gall ink, which is the kind of ink that Parmigianino used in the 16th century. This is a common recipe for oak gall ink. There are about 30 of them that I have in my collection in terms of recipe. I'm going to add rainwater, gum arabic, and a little iron sulfide. Iron rusts and it eats through the paper. There are many old drawings that are consumed in this way in parts of the drawing, and I imitated that on the Poussin. And I did it, I wouldn't have done it on a more important drawing because it lowers the saleability of a drawing when it's in bad condition. I mean, if I'd meant that Poussin to pass as a Poussin, which I did not, I would not have aged it in that way because the value would have gone down immensely. But in this case, I thought, well, you know, let's give it a really nice old patina and make it convincing. So that's what I did. No ingredient is really secret because, you know, chemical analysis can discover it. But I don't want to encourage forgery, do I, by giving away these tricks of the trade that people might use dishonestly. Early part of my life, I think, was rather sad. My father seems to have been always out of work, and my mother had many children. The poor woman was under great stress. She seemed to have taken her, you know, revenge, as it were, on myself, and she used to treat me rather badly. At the age of 8, I was still trying my hand at drawing. Found that if you light a Swan Vesta match, you have a little piece of charcoal at the end that you can draw with. You can dip it in the school inkwell. In those days they had inkwells. I don't think they have them anymore. But anyway, I would do that and I would make sketches. And the headmaster came round making an inspection. And he saw that in my desk I had this matchstick and a piece of sandpaper. And he thought I was playing with fire and he gave me a caning for it. And I thought, well, I've been punished for the deed, now I shall do it. And set light to the cloakroom. And the fire began to spread. And I got frightened, and I thought I'd better tell the headmaster, Mr. Percy, what had happened. So I poked my smoky face round his door and said to him, because I didn't know how to put it. I mean, please, sir, I've set light to the school. So I recited a little poem we'd learned. It went, fire, fire, Mrs. Dyer. Where, Mrs. Clare? And at that moment, a puff of smoke came into his study, and I found myself in a juvenile court being charged. I was asked whether I was guilty or not guilty of arson. I didn't know either of the words. I didn't know the word guilty or arson. I didn't know what it means, but a policeman standing next to me said, say guilty, son. Say, own up, say guilty. So that's what I did, and ended up in Borstal. So that was, you know, an unpromising beginning.
Eric Hebborn arrived as a pupil at the Royal Academy of Art in 1957. Like the Academy itself, Hebborn was already steeped in the ways of the old masters.
Very little comment made about one's work, apart from the odd revelation that somebody had won a prize or one hadn't won a prize.
He seemed to win a lot of prizes. We didn't win any, hardly.
No.
Practically nothing.
He was a very sort of silent creature. I mean, he just kept to himself. He didn't mix with other students, as far as I remember. He was always, I never remember seeing him in the canteen or anything. He was always round there painting these Veronese green grounds and all this old master stuff, which
he painted very much in the old master style as a student.
I thought he was a joke, actually.
Karen Ray and Nancy Galsworthy also studied with Hebborn.
It was a school that produced a lot of brilliant people, of whom Eric was one, though not appearing to many to be so, because he was very quiet. But when you talked to him, you knew he was an interesting person straight away.
Oh, I was madly in love with him, yes. But which is why I used to say Nancy's playing hard to get rid of.
When he was at the Royal Academy, he won all the prizes for drawing. So we're dealing with a very gifted draftsman.
While he was still a student at the Royal Academy, Eric Hebborn discovered that he was colourblind.
I had this curious thing, I believe men have it more often than women, of not being able to distinguish between certain greys and certain greens. And I sometimes paint pictures with fierce greens, which I just couldn't see, and I thought they were delicate, pearly greys, and in fact they were not. And I had to look at the tubes of colour and read the labels to make sure that I wasn't falling into this trap. There was a time when the hippies were around and people were on LSD, and I was given some in a cake. I didn't know that it was there. It had been ground up, and I was suddenly hallucinating and seeing things in the most extraordinary way, and my colour blindness seemed to clear up after that.
One 18th century Italian draftsman whose architectural drawings have consistently attracted Hebborn is Giovanni Battista Piranesi. A fine example of this master's work, a magnificent Roman port, was sold to the National Gallery of Denmark for £14,000 in 1969 by the London dealer Hans Calman.
Who was Hans Calman? Because he's now dead. He was a dealer in drawings, and a very important dealer in old masters, who perhaps had the best stock in London of old master drawings at one point, perhaps even better than Cornaghi's. I sold quite a lot of drawings to him. I mean, I imagine it went into the hundreds. He, put my work on the market in large numbers and to important people.
There is a Piranesi in the National Gallery of Denmark, a Roman port, magnificent Roman port. Did you do that?
Yes, of course I did. I've said so often enough, and so have other people said so.
Why do you suppose this is not being accepted now?
Well, I don't know. Wishful thinking, perhaps, on the part of the National Gallery of Denmark.
But no proof of...
But, I mean, it's absolutely... Well, I say, but people believe what they want to believe. But there's no doubt that the drawing passed through my hands. I mean, I had the drawing, and it was I who sold it to Hans Calman, and it was Hans Calman who sold it to the National Gallery of Denmark. And it was not known before.
Hebborn's friendship with the late Sir Anthony Blunt lent credibility to his activities as a dealer.
The dealers who work with higher quality drawings tend to want a scholarly opinion. And this is why, in the case of Blunt, he would occasionally give his imprimatura and say, oh yes, I believe that is a genuine Poussin, Castiglione, Dalla or whatever artist Blunt happened to know rather a lot about. And of course, sometimes mistakes were made. But if a mistake was made, it's basically uncorrectable, because without actually someone writing a very serious article in a learned periodical saying that these attributions are provably wrong, the matter just drops.
I knew that Anthony Blunt and this dealer, Hans Calman, were antagonists. I mean, they didn't agree with each other. Hans thought that Anthony was, not very bright on Poussin, and Anthony thought that Hans Calman wasn't very bright. So I thought I'd make this drawing to tease them. I thought I'd make it near enough to Poussin for Anthony to take it seriously, but not close enough for him to accept it and put it, among the master's works. Then I'd take it to Hans and say, look, Anthony Blunt says this is a fake. What do you think? And I knew that his reaction would be, what, the fake? If Anthony says it's a fake, it must be genuine, that sort of thing.
Anthony Blunt was regarded as one of the great experts. He was, after all, in charge of the Royal Collection, and the Royal Collection is one of the most magnificent collections of Old Master drawings in the world. Anthony was engaged in cataloguing it and supervising other people's catalogues of it. His range of expertise and knowledge and awareness was immense. Christopher White at Colnaghi's had been one of his pupils, just as I had been, and I'm sure that amongst Anthony's pupils there was a level of devotion, if not veneration, which made us all take very seriously anything that he was inclined to suggest.
When I have a friend, I treat them slightly differently to the way I treat. So I'm not totally objective about Anthony. I would hate to ruin his reputation as a scholar. When he was alive, I didn't want to do it, and now he's dead, I don't want to do it. I don't want to to jeopardize his, well, I've said it, his reputation. So I shall tend always to rather defend him. I know this is not objective, but at least I admit it.
Were you lovers?
No, we were not. No. Oh, yeah. Well, we almost were. There was one evening I came back from the Rome scholarship, and I hadn't seen him for a number of months. And he sent me a telegram. He said, well, why are you so damn standoffish? I think the telegram read, well, why so standoffish? Telephone, and he gave his telephone number, and I phoned him up. He said, come round this evening and we'll have a few drinks together. And I went round. He was drinking his gin and tonic, which he loved, and I don't mind it either. But I had an empty stomach, and I got as drunk as a lord, and he got as drunk as a sir, which he was in those days. And we were reeling around. He eventually collapsed on his bed. And I'm sure if we hadn't drunken so much, I mean, we might have actually made love, but we did literally go to bed together. And in my book, I've said that we were suffering from brewer's droop, as they call it in some circles.
What Hebborn did, and where he was very clever, was that he did deal in Old Master drawings, as well as being a brilliant artist himself. So he mixed his drawings with those by original works, and I think he probably did show them to Blunt, and Blunt quite naturally was a collector, and therefore anyway he would have been interested in seeing them, and I'm sure Blunt would comment on them. But I don't think there was any collusion there with Blunt actually working with Hebborn and then telling him to go to Sotheby's or Christie's or Colnaghi's or wherever and sell the drawings.
It seems as though I sold a lot through Colnaghi's because Colnaghi's are the only people who made a public statement saying that I'd sold.
In 1978, the London dealers, Colnaghi & Co., felt obliged to issue a statement to the press. They acknowledged a common hand at work in a number of the drawings that they had handled over the previous 10 years. The source was Eric Hebborn. One of these was a missing link in the oeuvre of the great Flemish master, Sir Anthony van Dyck, purporting to be a study for his painting of Christ crowned with thorns.
I was looking through a book on Van Dyck drawings, and I saw a series of drawings, preparatory studies for a painting. And I thought, you know, he's missed a chance there, old Van Dyck. It would be better if that figure was moved over here and a little bit more stress there and so on. I'll try that out. And so I made a drawing in his manner, making a variation on the other drawings.
What was interesting about Eric Hebborn's approach to making that drawing was that he found a group of preparatory studies made by Van Dyck for a painting where Van Dyck had experimented with different positions. I mean, this is a perfectly common thing, but it was unusual that we had, I think about 4 or 5 drawings for this particular composition. And what he very skillfully did was to rearrange the figures, taking one figure from one drawing and another from another. In itself, a perfectly reasonable thing for the artist to do. I mean, as he was working through his ideas to find the ideal solution. But when you study them very carefully, you see there is something rather stilted in the way that he extrapolated one figure from one drawing and another. But as I say, it was well, I have to say, rather brilliantly put together.
Colnaghi's unwittingly sold Hebborn's drawing to the British Museum as a Van Dyck for an undisclosed sum in 1970. It is now correctly attributed to Eric Hebborn.
Whoever buys a fake has been cheated. That is something which causes concern. I mean, whether it's a public institution or a private collector, they're both being cheated. And I think that one's concerned when people are cheated.
Many of the drawings that Hebborn claims to have made have passed through the hands of leading dealers and the great auction houses, Sotheby's and Christie's, into the possession of private collectors. As well as Renaissance masters, Hebborn claims around 80 drawings in the style of Augustus John, successfully executed, mistakenly attributed, and sold in London. Mr. Noel Annesley, Deputy Chairman and Director of Fine Arts at Christie's, was unavailable for comment. But Julian Stock, of the Old Master Drawings Department at Sotheby's, was glad of an opportunity to clarify the confusion.
Well, it's possible, 1,000 drawings, but the list that I've been given of what he's admitting to only comes to 80. So it seems to me there are another 900 or so out there. One of the drawings that we sold as long ago as 1967 was this rather beautiful drawing of a page, which took us in because we catalogued it as attributed to Francesco del Cossa and based on an attribution of another drawing in the British Museum, which in fact Mr. Hebborn now claims was his prototype. And we sold it. I think it must have been one of the first drawings that he actually sent in for sale, and it was purchased by Colnaghi's, who then they didn't believe our attribution to Francesco del Cossa. They called it just North Italian School, 15th century, and it was purchased by the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York, which is one of the most renowned libraries in the world, I would say. Well, he must be one of the very best that probably ever lived. I think one might go that far, although now, of course, that one's recognized his work, it's very easy to see them. For me it is, anyway, it's very easy. I'm sure for some people they might still be struggling to actually believe that they can be forgeries. Another drawing that we had that is apparently claimed by Eric Hebborn that he drew was a drawing by Jan Bruegel that we sold. And this one, I must admit, is very different from the others that we're seeing now. The paper's foxed, which is rather like a sort of freckling. It's some of the iron in the paper which has got damp, and it's a disease in the paper. And this drawing, which is very spontaneous, he claims he drew, and I'm not actually 100% certain that he did it. I wonder really whether this is by Hebborn himself, and I'd like him in a way to look at the drawing. However, we sold it, and then it went to a dealer in Hamburg, and the dealer in Hamburg didn't find a client, and he gave it to another auction house to sell in Amsterdam, and it was sold in Amsterdam, and I don't know where it is now. This is a Leonardo drawing that was offered to us. When I'd looked at it, I felt that it was a forgery, and I'm not certain that it's by Eric Hebborn, but I wouldn't be surprised, and I would be interested to have Mr. Hebborn's comments on it, because in my opinion and a number of other people, it is without doubt a forgery.
Why is it forgery?
The facial types is one of the main giveaways here. Although there is pentimenti in the head of the Baptist, the faces are too sweet, and they don't have the physiognomy that you would have in the early 16th century. Pentiment is when an artist is rapidly working out a position for a figure, and he'll move his head like this, like that, like this, or like this. And that will all be on one drawing. Now that is pentiment. We call it pentimenti. And when we see that, that gives us lots of confidence that the drawing is an original work of art, because normally the copyist doesn't do that. He just copies one position of the head. So Hebborn knew this, probably. One, obviously, he loves the old masters. He must have looked at them very intensely. The fact that he uses old paper, why didn't he use new paper? He didn't use new paper because he knows that we're not that silly.
Old volumes containing blank fly leaves are still easily available from antiquarian bookshops.
Here I have another book. I've removed a piece of the vellum, and curiously enough, the shape corresponds rather, with this drawing. If we notice the line slopes down at the top and so on. This is attributed to Pisanello. It's a drawing of an eagle's head. The inspiration for that drawing came from a photograph in a book called Mondo Animali, and there's the photograph. Let's have a look at the drawing together with it. There we are. You see it's in exactly the same position, and I think there's little doubt that, in fact, that photograph is the inspiration for this drawing.
This drawing was attributed to the Italian Renaissance artist Pisanello by the gallery Salomon Agostoni Algranti at their sale in Milan in 1885. In the same sale, which contained a large group of drawings now claimed by Hebborn, was a small study of women attributed to Parma il Giovane.
Here we have Parma il Giovane, Venice, 1544 and so on. And here's my sketch for this, or related to it. I screwed it up, I wanted it to fade away, and somehow it survived. It was sold in this thing, and it has here ex-collection Earl Spencer. Now, how the hell he could have had it before I produced it is something I shall never know.
Important drawings often bear one or more collector's marks, small stamped monograms which indicate their past history with collectors, such as Jonathan Richardson and Sir Joshua Reynolds.
Many of the drawings that he's now claiming to have done bear fake collector's marks on them. Doing that, I would imagine, is going beyond just drawing and letting the expert make up his mind. He's actually making the expert believe that the drawing comes from Sir Joshua Reynolds or Sir Peter Lely, and therefore it should be an original.
Reynolds is not a particularly distinguished collection. It contained an awful lot of dross. And I mean, sometimes sheets with a collector's mark on are more interesting for the mark than for the drawing. So it was quite a shrewd one to choose.
Yes, why not? They're very decorative. I mean, it could be claimed. I mean, people will claim that it's forgery, but that's just their opinion.
Tell me about why did you put collector's marks?
Well, they look nice, for one thing. And
surely it's because they helped convince the experts that they were genuine.
I don't think so. I mean, if they were experts, they would have seen that they were false collector's marks. They should have seen, in fact, they weren't done very well. Some of them were done freehand in watercolour, rather than being stamped. I mean, I did them in a very amateurish way. They shouldn't have been fooled at all.
But you see, what is the whole factor in the whole affair that seizes people's imagination is the money. Eric has never harmed anybody. He's cost a whole lot of people a lot of money, and I'm jolly glad.
laugh at the expert and have a certain amount of pleasure in seeing a drawing that you did in a museum with a learned catalogue entry, and you look at it and you think, well, they don't know what they're talking about, and I suppose there's a certain amount of pleasure. Of course, in a way, I find it amusing myself.
It's been claimed that you're a millionaire, that you made $1 million.
Yes.
Are you a millionaire?
No, certainly not. A great deal of money must have gone through my hands, but it goes through everybody's hands nowadays because life is expensive. Even a modest lifestyle like mine costs money, and I've had to make a living as an artist, a painter, sculptor, and all this sort of thing in my own right. And some of the money I've earned has come through doing the fakes, as it were. Well, I don't like the word fake applied to perfectly genuine drawings, but, you know, it's a word that people will apply to what I've done.
I think that he's behaved really extremely badly to people who have trusted him, and that I find deeply offensive. As for any sympathy with the trade, that I have none at all. The trade has always been well, certainly for the great bulk of the last 30 years, the trade has been run by, put no fine point on it, who ought to have known their business better, who ought not to have had such elastic judgment, who ought not to have taken risks, who, knowing once the finger had been pointed at Eric, as it was very early on, that he was a dangerous customer to deal with, and continue to deal with him. For those people, we need have no sympathy at all.
My immediate reaction to the idea that Eric made at least 1,000 drawings would suppose that there were probably rather more than that, judging by the rapidity with which they are scribbled.
I believe it was Diogenes who went out with a lantern in the middle of the day and was asked what he was doing. He said, well, I'm in search of an honest man. And, well, I think you might possibly find an honest man, but I don't think you'll find an honest man who's also a dealer.
No dealer is likely to turn down something in which an enormous profit resides on a sort of 10% suspicion. He will take it on and push it.
Italian dealers are an extremely dodgy lot, in general, I suppose. I mean, Italy has been a source of fakes for centuries. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant, and the dealers don't actually mind selling them. You know, if somebody is foolish enough to buy them, why not? If they get something in that looks like Pontormo, they're frightfully keen to sell it as Pontormo. You know, they won't go round and really seriously look into it.
Palazzo Strozzi fair is the kind of place that I try to avoid because it's full of rather snobby people and flashy kind of people. And I feel also too close to the dealers. I like to see as little of them as I possibly can, just enough to sell them something, and then I'm off. Because on the whole, you know, they're not the kind of people I like. And I believe they don't like me anymore. A dealer who deals in the north of Italy, he asked me if I could find for him a collection of old master drawings. And I said, well, no, I don't deal in drawings anymore. He said, well, you know, it would be very well paid. I mean, don't worry about that. And I produced for him 30 or so important old masters. I mean, very big names, Pontormo and, I don't know, Pisanello, Parmigianino, this sort of thing. This dealer took the drawings away and put them into sale and gave wrong attribution. I mean, he must have known that the things were fake. I mean, he commissioned them. I mean, he'd asked me, will you please do this? And I'd done it, you know. And so he knew perfectly well what he was handling. And when I saw a sale catalogue with these drawings reproduced, I found that not only had he given the attributions as being firm and definite, he'd also made stains on the drawing to simulate age, which they didn't need because they were on old paper with old materials in any case. And he'd also given false provenances. And I was so surprised to find that the prices were so high. I mean, 170 million, I think it was, for a Pontormo that I'd made. We were talking about £90,000 or something like that. That's quite a lot of money for a drawing that you've only paid the artist £750 for, isn't it? There's quite a markup.
You know a man called Eric Hebborn? Yes, it's by Eric Hebborn. Eric Hebborn? Signor Eric Hebborn? He's an artist.
The Salomon Agostoni Algranti catalogue for their Milan sale of November 1985 appeared to confuse the dealer who had helped to compile it.
Eric Hebborn? Si. No?
The exact details of the Milan sale remain shrouded in mystery. One magazine reported huge prices, while other dealers who attended the sale dismissed it as a bad joke. Little is known of the whereabouts of these drawings, but one of the Milan Hebborns, a pastoral scene attributed to Castiglione, was sold for over £9,000 at Christie's London in December 1990. It was bought by a leading dealer in New York.
I have, in fact, carried out my most significant work in the last decade or so. But this is merely because I'm getting better. You know, when an artist isn't quite like a footballer who sort of gets tired after the age of 25 or whatever it is. Artists can go on forever and ever. There's a beautiful drawing by Goya on this subject, saying we still learn of himself as an old man with a beard and he's tottering towards the grave. But one can still learn and must still learn. And so even in my fakes, I'm getting better. I don't know when. I suppose if you did the perfect fake, you can't get any better. I'd like to think I have done one or two perfect ones. The old master drawings are usually slight and sketchy or so on and so forth, but nevertheless they're very important because they are much nearer to the artist's original thought. You know, he's dashing down an idea in his first sketch, and often this is lost in the final work. One is closer to the creative process in a drawing than one is in a final piece of sculpture or painting or fresco. And this is one of the values of drawing. But I believe there's an even deeper value to drawing. And mankind is at the point of losing it. It's becoming a dead art. And it's the art of line. I wouldn't say that I'd been taken seriously by society or by the scholars or by anybody else. I would say I'd been totally ignored. The only reason people are taking notice of me now is because I've made a handful of fakes. Nobody is truly interested in the art side of it, what I've really done, whether I have a contribution to make or not. What they're interested in is the scandal of someone having fooled some experts. We should enjoy works of art for what they are, and don't worry too much whether the attributions are correct or otherwise. And in the long run, I think my story will have a beneficial effect on the experts and so on. I think they'll take a wider view of the whole matter and not be such fusspots as they are now.